Okay, so we have a group of us here today to talk about orienting to transformation versus incrementalism. And this is really about how continuous improvement, which has shaped so much of our industrial dialogue and cultural processes, may or may not support the concept of transformational change as we face big things like energy transition, transforming the face of industry, and a couple of the other things that we're trying to do that are materially different. And to talk about this today, we've got Michael McElenie and Laurie Freeman, and myself, Teresa Waddington, and we're going to go through a round of introductions before we jump into what is intended to be a real conversation on this topic. So, Laurie, why don't you start us off?
Hello, my name is Laurie Freeman. I have been a general manager in an energy company. I've worked in the industry for 29 years, spent the first 10 years in hardcore engineering, downstream and upstream, and I've spent the last 19 really in roles where transformation versus incrementalism has been a key part of being successful. And so I look forward to this conversation, Teresa.
Awesome. Michael.
Yeah, I think we're the 3-decade club because we've been all working very diligently for that. Yeah, for me, it's about 3.5 decades. Primarily as an organizational and leadership development consultant, and working in complexity, whether that complexity is large-scale industrial or global enterprises, large-scale tech organizations, and more recently, really embracing this understanding of complexity and the need for us to be able to embrace complexity from the perspective of integration, of making sure that we understand complexity as it is, rather than trying to reduce it to something that might be more manageable but unrealistic. So that's where I'm coming from.
Awesome. And I'm Teresa Waddington. I'm working in sustainability and HSSE. My background is about 20 years in the energy industry, working across projects, development, commercial, management roles in operations and maintenance. And I like to say I'm on a mission to turn my dad's oil patch into my daughter's energy garden. And this fits firmly in that space of, can we get there by continuing to iterate what already exists? Or my bias, which I'm going to share openly right now, is needing a full-scale transformation. And I think when it comes to this topic, a concept or a quote, and I'm going to paraphrase this quote that resonates for me, is Henry Ford saying something along the lines of, if I'd simply improved on what existed, I would have tried to make a faster horse. And so I think as we start to face what exactly constitutes an energy garden between molecules and technologies and workforce and policies, and how does that all come together to create true change, that's where my lens is on this topic. So why don't we start off? And I think that the concept of what is the difference between incrementalism and transformation, and can they, Laurie, I think in a previous conversation, we talked a little bit about, can they coexist, or do you need to reject the concept of continuous improvement in order to create transformation? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. First off, I want to thank you for asking such an interesting question just to force the conversation. And I'll probably say, I'll go into my thought process on it, knowing that we're all on the same page. But if I think through my last 29 years of experience, and I think through the types of change that have happened over time, and if I were to plot a little line and then a curve of the change versus a unit of time, that would be a curve with a pretty steep ramp up over the last 10 years, and especially over the last 5, and as we all know, over the last 18 months. And so for me, I believe that we need big transformational thinking and transformational change that includes the whole system. And we need incrementalism and continuous improvement to get the organizations that we need to see make the change successful from where they are today to where they need to be, so that we're all thriving in this new world. And for me, I'm thinking about the energy transition. And I think if we really want to make the types of change that we need to make and solve the problems that are created by that very steep curve, we are going to need a lot of transformational thinking, a lot of systems thinking, where we're thinking about people, process, data, and technology holistically to make major changes and to look for the additional dimension that hasn't been thought of with all of the legs of the stool just yet. And then we use the incrementalism and the continuous improvement to help bring people along. And as we're all probably on that same page, that role as leaders to bring the organization along, to bring the 10% along so that folks will follow, is absolutely the most critical thing that we need to be able to foster and grow through the next near future.
Michael, can I ask you a question then? Because I know that a lot of your research informed the concept of this question being a critical question for organizations to ask themselves as they look at how do we create change. Do you see a focus on continuous improvement, incrementalism, being at the cost of transformation, or how do you see those two things coming together in Lori's kind of eloquent description of them being a very supportive structure?
Yeah, and it's hearkening back to one of the first things I was involved with at a large scale in regard to the energy industry, since Lori, you brought that up. And that is, when we started to talk early on about safety, we were orienting towards things like technology, process improvements, right? Process safety. We were orienting towards ensuring that everybody had appropriate PPE, that we were moving towards more automation of those things that could be automated to keep people safe, drones and robots in the current form. And yet, if you look at the data around safety, if you look at, for example, from the late 90s into the early 2000s, at least the data that I've been looking at more recently, which is a UK-based database, we made some significant improvements in terms of safety. I think it dropped significantly. It dropped, like to 21 fatalities in that time period. But then if you look at 2007, about that time to recent times, we're down to 5 fatalities in that data set. So all that celebrates incrementalism in some respects, and I think that's right, except for that second piece of data that has significantly reduced the fatalities as much as it did. And then when you start looking at incidents in general, you even see a greater drop-off more recently. So what was introduced during that period of time? And my thought around that, my observation of the safety space in industry suggests that that's about the time when we started to bring mindset into the equation, when we started to challenge individuals and groups to think about safety differently. Now, certainly things like process safety got reinvestigated from different mindsets, and I think those things made a significant difference. But I also recognize that one of the most significant, quote, innovations that was really a shift in mindset was how we think about the human within the context. Goal Zero, for example, which I think is a really well understood aspiration across not only the oil and gas and energy sectors, but really it's showing up in most major industries right now, is one that suggests at the very, very heart of it is that human life is precious. That's very different than the incremental belief, let's save another couple lives this year, right? How you orient to that is quite different. So I think it's an example of how incrementalism was necessary to make traction as far as it could, but what we needed to actually create a significant shift was a shift in mindset, primarily mindset. And that with it brought a degree of attention to elements of both culture and the physical environment that was different than the focus we had before, where people could be paying attention to the machine in front of them versus, scanning and having vigilance for the whole, right? And then the social elements also showed a significant leap, which is not only am I there to protect myself, I'm watching for my buddies, right? And that looking outside of oneself was a shift in mindset that was necessary before the behavior followed it. So that's what comes up for me most immediately.